Dobbins Air Force Base. Now, the crash site is near what's called the GCA building, or Ground Central Approach building. We do not know anything yet about the crew members who were aboard that aircraft, whether there were any fatalities or injuries. There are reports of 6 injuries. That has not yet been confirmed. Again, the crash of a C-130, a test aircraft belonging to Lockheed, crashing near Dobbins Air Force Base on property owned by the Air Force near the GCA building at Dobbins Air Force Base. We, of course, will continue to follow the story and have the very latest for you on Eyewitness News starting at 5.
This has been a special report from Channel 5 Eyewitness News. We now return to our regularly scheduled program.
And I don't know what building that is. It is possibly the Ground Central Approach building. And again, it was a test aircraft that belongs to Lockheed. We have no reports of any injuries at this time. The plume of smoke that was evident just a few minutes ago is now gone. So we assume the fire is under control down there right now. Again, as far as we can see, that the building is the corner of the building is literally torn off. It is not there anymore. And again, we cannot see much of the aircraft. You can see the emergency vehicles surrounding that area. There are cars in the parking lot adjacent to the building, so there are obviously people inside there. It is in a large group of very tall trees just north of the runway again. And that's basically what we have right now, Pam.
Glenn, we have been told that police and fire units have been called in from surrounding communities, and we've also been told that Kennestone Hospital at Windy Hill and Cobb General are on alert if there are casualties. They have not yet been told that there are any casualties or how many they might expect to have in the next few minutes or so, but they are on alert and ready to receive casualties if any people have indeed been hurt. And with the shape of that building, we hope that that's not the case, but it certainly might be.
Pam, this is all Lockheed property right now, from what we understand, where the crash site is. It's all Lockheed, or rather, Dobbins Air Force property. And again, it was a Lockheed C-130 that...
north of the runway. It appears that at least a part of the aircraft fuselage came to rest against the building. That building is the medical facility there where they give flight physicals, and that's the dispensary there. It does not appear to us that it hit the building full force. It appears that the aircraft went into the trees, and a portion of it, and perhaps even some of the fire, caught the edge of the building on fire. It looks like they have foamed the area, not just of the crash, but also the corner of the dispensary there at Dobbins Air Force Base to keep that fire from spreading.
Bruce, I'm wondering now, the witness told us earlier, Greg Farrell said that it looked as if the plane was coming in for a landing. Can you tell from your perspective if that appears to be the case?
It's just difficult to tell, Carmen, because of we can't really tell what position the wreckage is in, and of course that wouldn't tell us a lot either, because it could have spun around after impacting the ground. Naturally, the control tower here at Dobbins Air Force Base is not being any help at all. They're concerned right now just with keeping aircraft out of their airspace so that they can take care of whatever rescue operations and the cleanup that they have to do. You might recall, Carmen, and folks at home, that it was about a year ago that a C-130 crashed in Evansville, Indiana. It was on approach to an airport there. This was an Air Guard aircraft that was on duty with the Air Guard, was on approach to the airport there, crashed into a hotel and dining room complex, killing 11 people on the ground, as well as the 5 members of the Air Guard unit that were on board that aircraft. That was the most recent C-130 accident. That particular accident, as I recall, was blamed on pilot error. And sometimes that makes sense because the Air Guard, when they go out on these routine flights that we talked about a few minutes ago, Carmen, what they're doing is they're practicing emergency procedures. They're practicing engine out procedures, they're practicing hydraulic failures, et cetera, and those sometimes can lead to situations in the cockpit that are hard to recover from. So that's the crash scene right there. Again, this aircraft built right here at Lockheed. Very ironic that this test aircraft right off the assembly line apparently would crash not more than a quarter mile from the Lockheed facility itself. There are some pictures of a C-130 to refresh your mind about what the aircraft looks like. This, I believe, there's a low-lex operations, low-level extraction operations where they take equipment out of the back. You know, it wasn't too long ago, too, that we covered the 2,000th delivery of a C-130 to a unit here. That was just, what was that, last summer, I believe, or the summer before. The aircraft has had a very, very long and very proud history with the U.S. Air Force and Air Guard units, and really does have a very fine safety record. Of course, as with all things that fly, Carmen, situations do develop, certainly too in the testing stage. Let's not lose sight of that. That's interesting that you say that this aircraft was on a test flight. When they roll that aircraft off the assembly line, there are many, many systems that have to be checked before the aircraft is blessed and signed off to whatever a military unit is going to take control of it. So, you know, anything could happen, and it's sometimes we take that for granted. But apparently, if this was a test flight, that perhaps is what happened here this afternoon. So that's the situation. Again, as far as fatalities on the ground, we don't have yet any idea of exactly what happened on the ground. That is the medical facility here at Dobbins. It looked like some fire got on the building. It didn't impact the building directly. We know of at least 3 crew members, Carmen, that were on board the aircraft.
Bruce, just quickly, I'm wondering, a lot of people around Dobbins Air Force Base that travel up and down Highway 41 have always been concerned about low-flying aircraft. How far away was this from Highway 41 from any street?
Well, we'll pull the shot back here just a little bit, and we can show you Highway 41. I'm going to have to swing the aircraft around a little bit. There's the Air Guard facility right here in this area, and that's the end of the runway. And Highway 41, of course, runs right adjacent to the end of the runway. And then as we swing back very slowly, Bruce, to swing back very slowly to the crash site and show them roughly how far... Yeah, just go back to the crash site. That's the end of the runway, and the crash site then is, it's about... I would say it's about a half a mile, Carmen, from the end of, from the crash site to where Highway 41 runs up in that area.
Close call. Sounds like it. Okay, Bruce, we'll check back with you a little bit later on. Thank you. Again, a C-130 crashed at Dobbins Air Force Base. We don't yet know the extent of injuries or fatalities or any casualties, but we will keep you up to date.
This has been a special report from 11 Alive News. We now
Test transport plane. Our Bruce Erion has been at the scene all afternoon and joins us now with details. Bruce, I understand this happened about 1:45 this afternoon.
Yeah, we got a bunch of phone calls from people in the local area that saw columns of smoke at the time. We didn't know if it was a fire rescue teams practicing out here. That happens quite frequently. Unfortunately, it was not. Let me give you the lay of the land here. We can show you where the crash site is. It happened just north of the runways. You may see a white spot there. That white is the foam that they often use to foam the runways in order to cut down on fire danger on landing aircraft. You see the foam on the crash site, not much left of the aircraft, a little bit discernible of the tail section there in the upper left-hand portion of your screen. The foam is also on the roof of a building right there. That building is the medical dispensary here at Dobbins. It looks like the aircraft came to rest, if not on a corner of the building, then at least very close to it. So they put some foam on the building as well to keep the fire danger down in that area. We are at 4,000 feet above sea level, 3,000 feet above the ground here because this airspace is restricted. And, of course, they have their hands full down there on the ground. That's why these pictures are taken from such a great distance. There you see some more of the fire trucks that are used for crash rescue spraying down the area, putting water on the area. Carmen, we have, I understand, somebody on the phone here who has talked with Dobbins Air Force Base. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a gentleman who has been in contact with Dobbins and can fill us in on what he knows right now.
Yeah, T.D. Jorgensen. Mr. Jorgensen, are you on the line with us here?
I am.
Yeah, this is Bruce Erion up in Skycam. We're looking at the crash scene here. I guess you haven't had a chance to see it on the ground, but you did have a chance to talk to some of the officials up here?
Well, I called the offices of a couple of commanding officers for the Naval Air Station as well as the Marine Corps wing, the group, I mean. And although the gentleman I called, the commanding officers, were not in, I did talk to some folks that would wish to remain anonymous, but give me some clue as to what took place. And being a good West Point rotorhead, you've probably got a better view up there than I do in my office right now.
Yeah, the thing that we can't figure out yet is it looks like the aircraft came to rest very close to the dispensary, which is right there on the north side of the runways. You didn't hear anything about fatalities on the ground, did you?
I did, as a matter of fact. And Bruce, being an ex-aviator myself, I think that by the sounds of things and the reports I've heard, it sounds to me like there might have been some screw-up with the empennage and the ailerons or something, losing control, because the aircraft actually was off the runway when it came to rest. And it did come in just about into that dispensary before the firefighting crews arrived to extinguish the flames and whatnot. But I believe that nobody survived the crash that was in the aircraft, is what I've heard.
Yeah, they have told us, and Carmen, you were the one that said this earlier, that 3 people were on board the aircraft. The C-130 on a military operation, as you know, Carmen, having flown on them, would carry as many as half a dozen crew members.
That's true.
If this were a test flight from Lockheed, of course, they cut the number down to the absolute minimum, and that would explain why there were just 3 on board. But, you know, the thing that concerns me, that's a parking lot for the dispensary there in the back area. Look just to the left, Bruce. Pan left slightly. See, there's a parking lot in the front, and then there's also parking in the back. And this is pretty traumatic for me, too. I mentioned earlier I had taken a flight physical in that building just a couple of years ago, so that's why I recognized
So did I.
where it. Did you really?
Yeah, I took a physical in that thing when I was trying to transition into the C-130s years ago, and the next door neighbor to my wife, the lady, I think she was a commander in the Navy. She was the last outgoing commander of that dispensary.
Yeah, it's not a very big building, a single story there, but you'd have to guess that it's probably staffed on a regular basis by, 30 or 40 people in there regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easily. And Bruce, once again, if it happened around 1:45 this afternoon, this would be at a prime time of coming and goings for lunch hours. So we don't want to speculate on the worst, but it certainly doesn't look exactly good right now.
Carmen,
Yeah.
I think that the actual crash took place just like about at 1:32 thereabouts, 1:33, something like that.
Oh, I see. Okay, T.D., thank you so much for joining us on this.
You're welcome.
Bruce, is there anything else that you can see from your vantage point? Has the fire been put out completely?
Yeah, it does look like they made pretty quick work of this fire out here, Carmen. You know, these trucks that they use to foam the runways and actually they don't really foam runways anymore. They foam the crash scene. But it looks like they got over here in pretty short order and got the fire taken care of. As we look at that dispensary, and I don't mean to get anybody concerned that might have friends or loved ones working in that building, it really does look like the foaming of that thing was done as a precautionary measure. It doesn't look like it caught fire. It looks like all the wreckage was contained to that parking area by that little radar site there in the back of the building.
Well, that's certainly good news. You know, Bruce, despite fears of constant low-flying aircraft and constant flights in that area, there have been very, very few crashes around that area. But, you know, back in November of '89, there was one involving a Navy A-7 that crashed into a Smyrna apartment complex. I know very well you remember that one.
Boy, I sure do. That evening, in fact, we had just tied the helicopter down for the night, and as we were getting ready to leave rooftop heliport, we looked up. We could see the flames coming up from that crash site there. That Navy A-7, the pilot having some sort of problems. Of course, that's a single-engine, single-seat fighter bomber. He had to eject from it, and the aircraft crashed in flames there. He was, again, on a routine operation. That was out of the Naval Air Station here at Dobbins Air Force Base. And by the way, they have a fleet of new aircraft up here, so that at least that concern with that aircraft has gone by the boards. And the C-130 being a 4-engine aircraft, this scene right here, fortunately, has certainly not been one that we've seen here at Dobbins. In fact, I can't recall myself, Carmen, the last time we've seen a C-130 accident here in the Atlanta area with the hundreds and thousands of C-130 operations that take place out of here. I can't recall the last one. Can you?
I can't recall one either. My father worked on the C-130 at Lockheed, and he couldn't recall one either. But, you know, and remember the one in Kentucky, the Kentucky National Guard plane. I'm sorry, in Evansville, Indiana, the Kentucky National Guard plane that crashed into the restaurant and hotel. All 5 crewmen on board that aircraft and 11 people on the ground were killed. Apparently, the crew in that craft did not realize the C-130's airspeed was too low until it was too late.
Yeah, and again, as I pointed out earlier, they do a lot of emergency training, so those situations they put themselves in to get ready for the real thing. Unfortunately, oftentimes, and this is just a fact of life in aviation, oftentimes training for the emergency creates a real one, and that may well have happened there in Evansville, although that probably will never be known.
That's true.
The situation here, though, it appears, you say this was a test aircraft coming off the, maybe either coming off the assembly line, or perhaps even it was one of their, what they call test bed aircraft. You know, aircraft manufacturers will have certain aircraft that they use to test certain systems and new additions to the aircraft fleet on, so we don't yet know whether it was a brand new one or whether it was perhaps a test bed aircraft.
No, that's not clear. We're on the phone to Lockheed now, and hopefully we'll have some more information on that a little bit later. But right now, Bruce, we have another eyewitness. Mike Shallutto is on the line right now. Mike, are you with us?
Yes, I am, ma'am.
What can you tell us?
Okay, I work for a company in Volkswagen, which is just adjacent to the runway. I was outside on the lot, and I saw the aircraft, which I identified as a Charlie 130. I can't tell whether it was a Lockheed test bed aircraft or not. It banked very steeply to the port side, and I say an altitude of about 300 or 400 feet. The aircraft seemed to lose control and then nose dived into the trees behind the tower.
Was there, could you tell if there was an explosion? Could you hear
No, there was no apparent explosion, but the turn was a very steep turn. I'm an ex-air traffic controller, and it seemed to turn very, very steeply to the port side, and it indicated to me that it lost power and then just nosedived behind the trees.
Mike, was the airplane taking off or landing? Could you tell?
It was difficult to say from where I was standing, but in the turn he was making, I would imagine that he was making a pass over the field, because certainly if he was taking off, it would have been a very tight turn for that aircraft in a port turn.
We can show you. Let's widen that shot out slightly, Bruce Mason, and we'll show folks. We can't show you, Mike, but it crashed here just about no more than a quarter mile north of the main runway. That's the main runway right there, and that's where it went into the trees there, right behind that stand of trees where that dispensary is. So it was certainly well within what would be considered the traffic pattern for Dobbins Air Force Base here.
Yeah, I would imagine it was either in the pattern or taking off. I mean, this aircraft has the capability of taking off a very short runway space, but it just appeared to me that it was actually in the pattern and maybe overshooting. But the turn appeared to be far too tight for the aircraft.
Yeah.
Just lose control then.
And this being a 4-engine aircraft, Carmen, it's capable certainly of operating with reduction in power. In fact, under certain conditions, it's capable of operating with both engines in off on one side. But you can get yourself into situations either with your gear out, flaps, et cetera, certain flight configurations where if you have a certain combination of failures or problems, it's very difficult to get yourself out of it.
Well, that's right. I mean, it is capable of operating on 2 engines. But, I mean, at that height, if it loses control and the aircraft did stall, if that was what happened, you would have no height to be able to level it out.
Yeah, that's the worst place for it to happen. Well, Mike, thank you very much for those insightful comments, and we appreciate you being with us here this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Okay, now we're going to show you some brief pictures of what the C-130 looks like. These are some test flights coming in. Now, it is a transport plane that is used very extensively by the military to transport troops and equipment. Again, a C-130 test plane owned by Lockheed crashed at Dobbins this afternoon. We don't yet have any confirmation on fatalities or any injuries, but certainly we will keep you up to date as information becomes available.
Another cold and flu season. Still are pumping foam into that area, trying to put out any fires that may still be occurring. Chris?
Glenn, just one more thing. The crash did happen on Air Force property. You're probably being kept back just a little bit. So residential areas in the area are not affected except perhaps by traffic and other things, because the plane was from Lockheed, crashed there at Dobbins.
Right. Between that Army medevac building and the crash site is a radar tower, so it came right down between the radar tower and the Army medevac unit, right down into that parking lot. And again, you can see the pictures there, not much left of the fuselage at all, and a portion, the southwest portion of that building appears to be missing at this time from our vantage point here. Chris?
All right, we're told it is the Navy building there at Dobbins, yeah. Glenn, we know you're there in Chopper 2 to keep us up to date on the crash of the C-130 test cargo plane. We will be back with you shortly, and we will have more for you on Action News as soon as we get more information.
This C-130 apparently was on a test flight. It was either on landing or takeoff. We haven't yet been able to determine that when it crashed just about a quarter mile north of the runway in this stand of trees and up against that medical dispensary here at Dobbins. 3 people aboard the aircraft would have to assume that they perished in the crash. No word yet on the fatalities on the ground, if in fact there were any. Again, this happened at about 1 or 1:30 this afternoon. The fire has been put out, and they're still, at this point, trying to assess the situation on the ground. Back to you.
All right, Bruce, thank you very much. Cheryl?
We're covering the crash of a C-130 test plane at Dobbins Air Force Base. It crashed just north of the runway about 1:30 this afternoon. Our Bob Sokola is on the ground near Dobbins now. Bob, what can you tell us?
Well, Cart, we're on the west side of Dobbins right now. Let me show you what's happening over our shoulder. As Bruce has been reporting throughout the past afternoon here, the scene now, at least, the fire, whatever fire was there, appears to be out. They've stopped putting water on the building, and the ambulance crew is still standing by. The people who are in the building, surrounding the building, are still being kept outside. They're starting to let folks back onto the base. They had closed it off for a short while. As a result, we'll be heading in there in just a few minutes. But I wanted to bring in Michelle Chapman, who arrived here on the scene, driving in her car just after the C-130 crashed. And what did you see, Michelle, when this happened?
Well, I was driving over, and I had seen a big puff of smoke fly up right when I had come over Powers Ferry in Delk. And my aunt had said right before I got home, about 10 minutes before I got home, that the apartment started shaking and everything, because we live right near the base. She said that everything started shaking and rattling like we'd never had before.
Now, there are test flights that happen all the time in this area. Any comparison to what it would normally have been in terms of shaking, rattling?
She said it was a lot worse.
A lot worse?
Yeah, that something had happened.
Okay, and when you arrived here, you saw plumes of smoke heading up into the sky?
Yeah.
All right, Michelle, thank you very much. Still a lot of unanswered questions, of course. Throughout the afternoon, we'll try to put some pieces together, have more for you a little later on. But right now, Carmen, back to you.
Okay, Bob, there may be one answer that we have. A source tells us that Lockheed was testing a new rudder system on that C-130, and that may explain why one witness says the plane banked steeply before it went down. Again, a C-130 being tested around the Dobbins Air Force Base area went down. We don't yet know of any casualties or fatalities, but of course, we will keep you up to date as any information becomes available.